So we ended last video by doing our little experiment with testing the blood sugar and noticing what reactions we were having in our body as we were doing that. And hopefully that illustrated for you how directly applicable this can be. It doesn't need to be just us sitting in perfect bliss all the time or frustratingly trying to focus on our breaths. This really applies to how we're living our everyday life. Now, the next question is, okay, so I'm able to feel what my body is doing when I'm testing my blood sugar for real. So what? And the reason that that's so helpful, as illustrated by the quote that I mentioned in the last video, is that we actually know from scientific studies that the very act of noticing how we're feeling without being so caught up in it, having enough space to say, oh, yeah, I'm feeling my belly is tight, or I'm feeling some sense of dropping, and maybe that's disappointment. That actually changes our reaction entirely, and it helps us to not fall into a negative cycle that stress can put us in. So from there, it also kind of illustrates the need for another tool, which we're going to talk about today, which is compassion. And compassion, we don't want to make it some big, mystical, foreign concept. Compassion is really just about how we respond to difficulty in our own life and in others' lives. So it's not sympathy, which is when we're feeling almost bad for something, we're feeling something for, or empathy, where we're just feeling with, but it's kind of like the empathy where we're feeling with, we're recognizing that there's a shared experience or an understood experience, and then actually taking some action. So I'm going to read two quotes here, which hopefully can kind of illustrate some of the meanings of compassion. So the first is by Daniel Goleman, who writes a lot about meditation. So he says, true compassion means not only feeling another's pain, but also being moved to help to relieve it. And the action part is really, really important. And whether it's another, as he's talking about, or with ourselves, actually having some urge to move to lighten the load a little bit. And then to lead us into what we're going to focus on today, this quote from Pema Chodron, which says, compassion for others begins with kindness to ourselves. And really, this is something that we're already doing. The very fact that you're watching these videos, the very fact that you're interested in taking action towards how can I make my experience a little bit easier? How can I be a better person for those around me, also for that matter? That already is compassionate action. But we can actually go a little bit further into really intentionally focusing on this compassion. So I just want to really briefly mention here, my background is in neuroscience, so I get really geeked out and excited about research, and there is a lot of really, really good research on compassion. And we'll post some of these below. And also, you can go on Google, you can go to NCBI or PubMed and find these things yourself as well. But some of the different findings show compassion helps us actually decrease our immune system response, our inflammation response, and even our behavioral response to different stressors. It shows that we're able to pay better attention to where there is some suffering or uncomfortable experience, without actually experiencing it as painful. So there's some really cool neuroscience, some brain imaging studies around that. It's also shown to prevent the body from going into as much of a fight or flight response. And the last thing that I'll share is that it's been shown that the degree of compassion towards ourselves, as scientifically measured, is predictive of what kind of emotion we react to in stressful events, which is pretty remarkable. So this is an important practice and extremely potentially useful for us. It's a tool for us with type 1 diabetes in particular because self-judgment is so common. We somehow get this idea from somewhere that we're supposed to be able to keep our blood sugars in range all the time, which, when we say it out loud, we know it's crazy. Of course, there's so many factors where it's unpredictable. We know sometimes, no matter how hard we try, that it's not going to go the way we want it to go. And it's really important in those moments for us to be a friend to ourselves rather than chastise ourselves for something that we did our best with and that we really couldn't control any better. So, we're going to do a meditation here in a second, but I do just want to define, which I've adapted from the work of Kristen Neff, who does a lot of work on self-compassion, to define this process of what it is to have compassion and have compassion towards ourselves. So the first part is to recognize that we're experiencing, you might call it suffering, or discomfort might be a more comfortable word for you, pain, whatever the word is. We're experiencing something unsavory if we're talking about compassion for ourselves. And that's kind of what we were already working on. So this is where mindfulness is really, really important. It's a really helpful tool to be able to say, whoa, what's going on there? And not just be caught up in it and have no presence of mind or no awareness. So the first is recognizing that we're having this experience. The second is this genuine desire to alleviate the suffering, which sounds obvious, but sometimes it's really difficult when we're frustrated with ourselves and we're like, I should feel bad, I messed it up. And the crazy thing is that's not really the most helpful response. We know that people actually take better health outcomes when they have less self-judgment. So again, this is just scientifically validated. But that second part is the genuine desire to alleviate our suffering. So once we recognize it, we say, I don't want it to be so hard for myself or for another. Part 3 is then regarding oneself with kindness. And this is the healing moment. This is where we can start to repattern a little bit, care for ourselves, and just provide some understanding space. And we'll get at how to do that a little bit. But if we can take this attitude of kindness, whether it's something that we imagine somebody that loves us would feel for us, or something that we feel for somebody that we love, and direct that towards ourselves, make it less personal. And then that kind of goes into the next part. The last part is recognizing our shared humanity. Recognizing that we're just a person too. Often we talk about ego and we talk about people that have these big inflated egos and, they act out in big ways and they make themselves seem so impressive and puffed up. But also on the other end of things, it's also this overemphasized ego or sense of self when we're getting really hard on ourselves because we think we're something other than just a human being, other than just another person that we're seeing in the street. So in that way, when we make ourselves less special, then we can recognize, wow, this creature here is hurting right now. And me being the closest one to me, I don't see anyone else around me, I can do something about that. So with that, we'll do a little practice. Feel free to pause if you need to get to a different room or get set up and get comfortable for a minute. And as always, we're going to start by focusing on the breath. So bringing your attention to your breath, wherever you find it comfortable. Lower belly, chest cavity, nostrils, whatever it is. Noticing the rhythmic experience of breathing, however it is. Just notice that it has a natural up and down to it. Comes and it goes. Continuing to pay attention to your breath. And of course, you can listen to my instruction, but don't get too focused. Just this very act of breathing is actually a form of compassion to ourselves. We're helping ourselves be in a better place. Noticing where the mind wants to go when it goes off. And just saying, I'll come back to you. For now, it's my breath. In this meditation, you can always come back to your breath. So, I want you to, keeping your eyes closed or softly opened, however they are, see yourself sitting in this room right now where you are. All of a sudden, as you're sitting here peacefully in your meditation, still focused on your breathing, you hear a knock on the door, or you hear somebody approaching. And on the other side of the door is another version of yourself, but it's a version that's feeling some more difficult emotion. And it can be an emotion around diabetes or around some other part of your life. If it helps, you can imagine a specific instance briefly that has been challenging for you. But if not, no need. You can just imagine yourself in this more difficult state. And as you open that door, I want you to welcome that person in. That representation of you in a different emotion. Maybe they look like you, how you look when you're feeling that way. Or maybe they look like something else that represents you when you're feeling that way. And how would you welcome that person? How would you welcome that person like a guest? Like a friend, a family member? Somebody that you're glad to see, even if they're not feeling well. If you're like me, maybe you'd give them a hug, or maybe you just wish them a very warm welcome. You can offer them something to make them feel more comfortable. And then let them take a seat with you, right next to you. So now you're sitting there just within yourself. Sitting with you here is this representation of yourself, feeling a very difficult emotion. to console so much or say so many things. If you want to imagine holding their hand or giving them a hug, that works, but mostly just sitting with them, accepting them as they are, letting them know that you're here with them. And now making a few wishes to them. You can repeat in your mind after me, just feeling as much as you can into those wishes. Saying to this version of yourself, may you be free from suffering. May you be at peace. May you find joy and happiness. May your load be lighter. May we always be friends and in this together. One more time, just wishing this part of yourself once again. May you be free from suffering. May you be happy, filled with joy. May your load be lighter. And may we always be friends. May we be in this together. Perhaps in your imagination, in your visualization, you notice this representation of you is even just slightly better off than it was before. And maybe it's not, maybe it's still raw. And you can always revisit with that part of yourself. For now, wishing them well, letting them know that you're going to come back to your breath and finish the sit alone. Letting them let themselves out of your room. Coming back to the sensation of breathing. Letting your nervous system drop back down, be calm. Be conceptualizing a little bit less. Noticing again what it feels like to breathe. If you're feeling different sensations than you were in your body before we did this meditation. Deepening your inhales slightly. Moving your fingers and toes. When you're ready, slowly starting to come back. As appropriate, opening your eyes, but not in a rush. So this experience of compassion meditation in this way can be a little odd and can feel a little contrived maybe. But it's a very useful way for us to tap into our ability to be compassionate for others and to create a very personal representation of a part of ourself. Whereas sometimes when we just try to focus on an emotion within ourselves, it can be a little more difficult and blocked. But sometimes if we imagine that outside of ourselves, it's easier to give that care. So I hope this was helpful. There's many more practices within the overarching theme of compassion. But this can be a very useful way to start thinking about and dealing with some of the difficulty that's both unique to us having type 1 diabetes and also just entirely a normal experience of being a human being.